mean, we always have our rules and based on what we're doing, right? And within our scheme and our defense, when we talk about this stuff, it comes back to numbers. And what is the offense? How are they aligning, and what are the numbers in the box? One of the things that I always hang my hat on is, listen. A lot of people are going to talk about stop and run. We want to suffocate the run. How are we going to go about doing that? We want to take away what they do well, and force them to do things that they don't do well, right?
On today's episode of the Left Hash Call, we have Jason Martinez. He is the defensive coordinator at Simpson College, and this past season, he was named the 2024 Region 5 Second Team Defensive Coordinator of the Year. Jason and I also coached together this past season. Welcome to the show, Jason Martinez. What's up, man? How we doing?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be on here. I'm glad you reached out and asked me. I like doing this stuff, so I'm more than willing to jump on, and I'm excited to be here, man.
Absolutely. I'm fired up. Glad you're on. Glad you got to step away during a busy time of the year as always. When is it ever really not busy though, right?
Yeah, I mean, trying to describe it to people, it's like we're just sprinting to the next thing. So, everybody's like, when do you have a non-busy time? I'm like, there isn't a non-busy time. We're recruiting, got season, off-season workouts, recruiting again. Like it's one sprint after another. We might have a second or two. It's kind of like the 400 repeats. You might have a 45-second break in between that 400 repeat, but you got to go do it again. So
Sure.
yeah, it's nonstop.
Yeah, and I was over, last week, when I was over there at Simpson, just watched practice, and I stepped into the office, and I think I asked you guys like, "Oh, how's the recruiting class shaping up?" And it's like, "Well, shit, it's always it never stops. It's never stops. It's either, move it. It's not okay. We're done with this class finally. It's like that thing's rolling right up until could be even the summer, and you might find some stragglers there. But
Yeah.
how are you? How have things been going? How's spring ball been shaping up, and what's new with you?
Yeah, things have been going well. Spring ball has been good so far. I mean, obviously we're in week 2. We have quite a few young pieces defensively. That we're trying to get those guys out there to understand and get more confidence in what they're doing and how they're calling things. We definitely have some holes to fill from last year. I mean, that's a big piece, and that's something that we're constantly thinking about in the back of our mind is who's going to be the best group of 11 out there that's going to help us compete. So it's going well. I mean, guys are picking things up pretty quickly. For the guys that are returners, that are young guys, you can kind of see like things are starting to click. They're like, oh, that makes sense. Like it didn't make sense in the fall because it was just, I mean, it's, for lack of a better term, they're drinking out of a fire hose at that point. Like it's boom, 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 boom. They're trying to adjust as freshmen, being new to the program, like what the standards are and what we do here. And spring ball kind of gets us, in that mode of like, hey, we're installing and we're doing things, but it's not so fast paced that like you have the season coming up and it's just like bearing down on them type of deal. So it kind of gives us a little bit of a time to, kind of refresh, restart, and kind of take our time through it. Like our installs for spring ball are completely different than it is in camp. Like camp, we're trying to get all this stuff one after another. And in spring ball, the installs is like, hey, we can go because we got, based off the NCAA rules, we get, the 16 practices, 4 padded practices. We got 5 weeks to complete it. We can kind of spread that out a little bit. So what we've been doing with our installs defensively, at least, is like, hey, we install 2, and then the third day of the week is a review day for us. So it kind of slows it down for those guys. But yeah, it's coming along. I mean, our guys have put in a ton of work in the off season. Shout out to Coach Schmitz and Coach Chintz. They've done a phenomenal job with that young group. I mean, the numbers are just out of the roof of how much more athletic, faster, stronger they've gotten, all those things. And we're seeing it on the field. It's just a matter of like, hey, kind of putting it all together right now. But it's been going good and things have been going well. I mean, we're excited about it where we're at right now. We just got to continue to build on it and, kind of use the momentum that we've kind of built over the last year to kind of keep stacking those days and get better. That's a big thing. So
Yeah, let's talk about, some of the pieces, just getting into some Simpson specific stuff before we move on. But, I think anytime you have a mix of young guys and veteran guys, it's usually a good sign of your team in general. And that was definitely the case this past year with you defensively. You had a lot of veteran guys, particularly at the linebacker spot. And now, you know, you you lose a lot of those veteran guys. You still have a good nucleus of, guys like CJ that hold that thing together. How do you go about installing in the spring when you have guys like CJ Handgardner who have been through it? That install, this is probably his third time now going through that install. And then also with, you know, a freshman safety that's he's only been through it once and he's got a lot of work to do. How do you kind of go about installing with those two different types of players?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I look at it as a coach and as a coordinator, I look at it as like, hey, this is a refresh for everybody. So we're gonna treat whether you've been through this 3 or 4 times or this is your kind of your first time with spring ball, we're gonna treat you like this is your first time, your first go around. Nobody's perfect. CJ is, don't get me wrong. CJ is a phenomenal player. I love him to death. He works his tail off. He's what you want in a leader. And you hope that rubs off on the young guys. But I still treat CJ like he's in year one of the system, and there's still things that we can continue to get better at and develop. I think that's the biggest thing is, you know, trying to fight that complacency bug a little bit is tough with veteran guys. So I'm always trying to find new ways to kind of reach them from teaching, but also telling them like, hey, this is why we do it this way, and these are the things that you can use and help add to that toolbox, so to speak. So I'm always trying to find ways for, especially for CJ being the guy that he is, and he's been a dynamic player for us. I mean, he's been 2 years in a row, the last 2 years here, he's been first team all conference, been second team all region player. You pop on the tape, the scouting report's going to tell you what you need to see. Like, that's the guy that they're going to focus on. So I'm always looking for new things for him, but I treat him just like I would like a freshman that or a sophomore that's just getting into the system and finally figuring it out. Like there are always things that we can work on, the finer details that we can focus on. Just footwork, eye discipline, those type of things are important, and why it's important for those guys and how it impacts the rest of the 10 other guys within the defense, and explaining that. And that's something that like you're always striving to get your guys to have that knowledge base as a coach that you have, which is tough, right? Like as a young coach, like I always felt like, well, why is this so hard for you guys? You should figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, but they don't spend the years that we have compiled as coaches on these little details. So just trying to find those little details to help them continue to grow and get better. And then challenge them to, hey, I'm not asking you to be perfect, but I'm asking you to get 1% better every day. What can you focus on? Like what did we do bad today, or what did we not do very well? And how can we adjust for the next practice and focus on that thing so that we get better at it, type of deal. So
Yeah.
that's
I
how I
always
try to go about it.
I always felt like, when I was going through as a player, I felt like my offense changed it felt like it changed every year.
Hmm.
There's little nuances when you do play in the same system, but for me, I played in, two different offenses while I was at Simpson, then I went to River Falls, and then I came back to Simpson. So I feel like I've always had to adjust, and also in high school, went from one high school to the other, constantly was changing. But I always kind of look at it like if you are learning the same system, things change a little bit from year to year, but not much. But it's kind of like watching the same movie twice. You start to,
Yeah.
you notice little things here and there that you didn't see the first time around. And my eighth time watching a movie like Rocky Four, you finally start to figure it out. You're like, oh, that's what's going on. And I think there's always opportunities to learn, little nuances within a defense, or in my case, learning offensive football. Whether that's applying what you already know now to whether that's the new installs with new tape from new teams, and how you can apply versus different looks. And I think that's a big deal when it comes to the installs is now, okay, teams are changing like crazy. Every year there is new offenses. And, for a long time, it was run the rock. And then for, a better part of 15 years, it slowly became, more of this air raid style thing. And now you're kind of starting to see teams kind of go back to that pro style offense, but you're seeing, obviously in the American Rivers Conference, you're seeing teams like Wartburg, teams like really kind of lean into that, power football and downhill runs versus, it's really, and we'll get into some of the mechanic stuff later, but let's talk about your journey real fast to where you are now. And let's particularly start at Albion. What took you there? Why'd you end up going there? And then, yeah, just kind of talk about, your journey a little bit to that spot.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'll kind of go back to high school to kind of give you a little bit of a kind of a background, right? My high school, Jackson Luma Christie, powerhouse in Michigan. My head coach is still coaching. He is like third or second all time in most wins in the state. I think he just won his 14th state title. And my senior year was kind of the start of that dominance. Like in 1996 we won a state title. 98 we lost in the semis. 99 we lost. I think it was either the semis or the quarterfinals to the team that won it. And then 2000 was my senior year, and we won the whole thing. We rolled everybody. We went 14-0, and that's kind of where it started for me. Like I've always had a passion for football. It was something I loved from a young age. But when I was coming out of high school, I had a lot of different programs I was looking at, right? I was looking at Grand Valley State, Saginaw Valley, Northwood. I was looking at Albion College, Adrian College. I was looking even at, Kalamazoo a little bit. So I was kind of all over the map, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate enough to play with some guys that I had connections to Albion, right? Our head coach at Albion was, Coach Craig Rundle. His son, Travis Rundle, is now the head coach there, his oldest son, Travis. And then when they moved to Michigan, he went to Lumen. Well, Troy, the youngest son, who was actually my age, we were, teammates together, graduated the same year and everything. He played at Lumen with me as well. We were pretty tight throughout high school. So it was kind of a natural attraction for me to end up at Albion, but I was kind of, I was the typical senior, in high school, like, I'll get it done when I get it done and whatever else. I was enjoying my senior year type of deal. And finally, it came down to like the guy that recruited me out of Albion or recruited me out of high school to Albion was Coach Dave Arnold. Great coach, phenomenal. He won a national title with I think it was Montana or Montana State back in the 80s. He had worked with major Division 1, Division 2, Division 3. He even worked in the NFL. And he finally called me up and he was like, "Hey, what the heck are you doing? Like, get your app in. Are we gonna make this happen or not?" And I was like, "Coach, I'm coming." So I got my app in there. I kind of knew I was going there because Troy was already committed there. We had a couple different guys from our team that were already going there as well. And I knew those guys. Like I knew I wanted to go play with a good program. I wanted to play with guys that I knew. I knew they were recruiting me for a purpose that was important to me. And Albion had success. I mean, they had a ton of success. I mean, in 1994, they won a national title. My defensive line coach there was a starter as a freshman on the 94 national championship team. I had a lot of connections there. So it made a lot of sense when I ended up there at Albion. So that's kind of how I got started was like, that piece. And I played all 4 years there. I'd like to say that, we won a conference title my freshman year. I was able to travel a little bit as a freshman, but we had some dudes up front. Like that was a culture shock for me. Like I
Yeah.
was used to being the guy, and I come in and then all of a sudden these guys are, 20, 30 pounds heavier than me and they're stronger than me. And I'm just like, what's going on? But I stuck through it and, played all 4 years there. I would have, I wanted to end it the right way. Unfortunately we didn't. We lost on a heartbreaker last game of the year that would have gotten us a conference title and got us into the playoffs. But the big thing for me was like I was a part of something, a brotherhood there that, to this day still, weighs heavily with me. Like I'm very connected to it. I talk to Travis every once in a while. It's kind of a full circle moment. He went from playing there, coaching there for a year to he coached Division 1, and then he became a Division 3 head coach. Like I didn't think he was going to go back, but he did, and it was pretty cool to see that when it happened. So it's awesome from there. You know how this life is as far as a coach goes. It's pretty tough to to get back for homecomings and stuff
Right.
like that. You know, if you work at your alma mater, it's awesome, right? You get to
Right.
go back for homecoming. But for me, I don't, because that's back in Michigan. But I mean, I still stay connected with those guys and talk with them and go through that piece. But that's kind of how it got started for me. And like, that's how I ended up at Albion is, you know, just through my connections and the relationships I built with the coaches. You know, I had a few of those schools who thought they were going to get me. And reality is, I probably wasn't the most truthful up front. I just wanted to take a couple free, you know, visits and skip out on school, those type of things, and be able to, you know, go. But you know, I knew I was going to Albion. It was just a matter of, you know, Coach Arnie, you know, telling me, "Hey, get your stuff together, man," and kicking me in the rear end a little bit and get
Yeah.
drafted in. So,
It's one thing you mentioned, like once you go to a Division 3, no matter who you are, I believe this is true for everybody. If you decide I'm going to go play D3 football, everybody and their mom thinks I'm going there to play and start all 4 years. I thought that, you thought that, every kid that we ever recruited thinks that.
yeah.
And the thing about Division 3 is you don't, in some of these Division 1s, you have a lot of guys that, it's particular in the P4, now P4 level. You got guys that are leaving after their sophomore year, and there isn't it's rare to find a bunch of seniors on one of those teams. At D3 level, everybody's got a good group of seniors that have been playing for a while and are dudes. And no matter how, there's exceptions for sure that play early, but your
Mhm.
first time on campus, it doesn't matter what team it is. You're like, sheesh, like you got guys that are, you know, absolute studs that are playing next to you, no matter how good the team is. But I definitely had that culture shock as well. I was like, you're telling me I'm the eighth quarterback right now? Like I'm one of eight, and I'm like, this is this is different. But either way, when did it kind of click for you? Like, hey, coaching is what I want to do. What drew you to that in the first place? And was there a specific moment that kind of confirmed this path is for you?
Yeah, I mean, I throughout college, I had no idea what I really wanted to do. Let's be honest about that. Back in that day, I just wanted to play ball, and you know, that was the next thing was, you know, I'll go to college and play ball, right? I had, you know, I was a wide-eyed freshman who thought I knew exactly what I wanted to major in. And it turns out, like, I got into some of those classes. I thought I wanted to be an athletic trainer at one point. Like, that's what I thought I was going to do, right? I got there and I hated the classes. I just thought it was boring, you know, and I didn't put a whole lot into it, didn't really apply myself. And, you know, those things kind of came back to bite me in the rear a little bit my first semester as a freshman. But, you know, I kind of fell into, you know, psychology as a major from that standpoint. And I was just kind of majoring in that. And, you know, it was the only reason why I did it was because I got a 4.0 in the intro course. And I was like, well, I guess this is my major, you know, because this is easy. And so as I got older, you know, it kind of really dawned on me that I didn't want to get away from football. I didn't want to get away from athletics, you know, but football more specifically. Like my senior year of college, I realized I was like, this is the last run, right? I'm not going pro. I'm not getting to the league. You know, we all have those dreams as kids, right? But you know, hey, genetics plays a big factor in that. And when I started looking around about, you know, my sophomore year of college, and I started dawning on me like, look, I ain't getting any taller. I'm
Mhm.
5'10", and my dad on a good day was 5'7", and my mom was 5'3". I was like, I out kicked my genetics a little bit here to be 5'10". So, you know, as a senior, I started thinking about it. I'm like, you know, yeah, I'm majoring in psychology, but what am I going to do with this? I don't want to be sitting in an office all the time. You know, I don't necessarily want to be, you know, a clinical psychologist or anything like that. And I started talking with my head coach a little bit, you know, Coach Rundle. I spoke with him. I was like, Coach, you know, I'm kind of thinking about this. I think I want to get into coaching college ball. Like, I think that's what I want to do. I want to coach football. I love it so much. I love being around it. I love what it gives you. You know, and I know I'm biased in this when I say it. You know, other coaches might think, you know, the same thing about their sport, but I think football is the ultimate team game. You know, there is a spot, a position for everybody. Whether you're the biggest and the strongest, but not the quickest at feet, whether you're lighter and smaller and you're fast, like you can find ways to utilize multiple body types and skill sets to have success. And so for me, it gave me so much, not only from, you know, a confidence standpoint, but also socially. academically. I just knew that at that point, and it was probably about midway through my senior year that I realized I want to coach ball. This is what I want to do. I want to give back to it because outside of my parents, the most impactful people in my life have been my head coaches for football. Coach Brogan, still to this day, even though I haven't played a snap since 2000 at Jackson Lumen Christi High School, has still impacted me with lessons I learned there. Coach Rundle, the same thing. And my last snap was in November of 2004 with him. So for me, like, I knew the things that I got from it were so much more than what I gave to it that I wanted to give back to the sport and give back to athletes. And so I talked to Coach Rundle about it, and he was like, "Listen, like, he was honest with me up front. He's like, I don't know if you're cut out for this. I really don't. I had my ups and downs as a young guy, and I think I was kind of on the shit list a little bit at times with him. But I was serious about it, and he's like, "All right, here's the deal. I'll let you come out and coach next fall with us, but you got to show up Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every morning at 6 a.m. We had back then we didn't have the non-traditional season, so we had a class, a physical education class that Coach Rundle taught at 6 a.m. that all the football guys signed up for, and it was basically conditioning. And he's like, you got to show up. You got to be there at 6 a.m. You're going to be there earlier because you got to set up drills and stuff like that. And if you show me that you can do that, then I'll let you be able to be a seasonal coach next fall. So I took with that and ran it. I mean, I did that every day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I was in there at like 5:15, 5:30 in the morning, setting up drills. I was also going to track practice in the afternoon because I threw, and I had track meets during the week and on the weekends. So I was doing that while maintaining my academic schedule and doing all that stuff. And I showed them. I was like, hey, like, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to prove to you that I'll be a valuable asset to you. And so after we got done through the spring semester, he's like, all right, you can help out with us. We're going to start helping out with some recruiting and doing some different things. He goes, look, I don't have a ton of money, but I'll pay you something. It'll be for the 3 months in the fall, but it won't be a whole lot of money. I mean, I laugh at it nowadays when I tell guys this, but I made $600 in my first year of coaching for 3 months. That's
That's
six
pretty
hundred dollars a
good.
month. Yeah,
That's
I know,
pretty good
right?
nowadays.
Yeah, nowadays, right? Like, if I was making $600 a month, that'd be great. But no, that was over the season for 3 years
Yeah.
or for 3 months. So I was just like, okay, I didn't care. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about that stuff. And ultimately, what I ended up doing was showing coaches that, like, hey, he's really serious about this. He wants to be a part of it. And that's kind of where I kind of got my start, was, at my alma mater, gave back to it. And then, after the first year, it was just like, all right, what's the next step? What do I need to do? And I talked with Coach Rundle, and Coach Arnold had, left at that point. He left after our junior year to go back to Colorado State and be the special teams coordinator there. And I stayed in connection with him, and kind of from there, it kind of just springboarded me into the coaching lifestyle.
Yeah, and amongst the, your coaching stops that you've had, obviously Albion, you went to Bemidji State up in Minnesota, Illinois College, Grinnell as your most recent stop, and now Simpson. I can imagine, I feel this way about my two stops, but I can imagine that you learned a lot of different things about coaching, and probably a lot about yourself as well.
Mhm.
What do you think, those different stops taught you, now as a coordinator?
Yeah, that's a great question. All those stops had value in them. I think there's a lot of times in this profession, a lot of coaches want to complain about where they've been or what's not there and all those things. And I think with the multiple stops that I've had as a young coach, but also some of the longer stops that I've had, like Grinnell, I kind of learned really, really quick from the guys around me. Obviously there are going to be guys that are going to mentor you and, help coach you and make you a better coach. But I also learned a lot of patience. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's tough in this profession, and especially with young coaches, is they just think, oh, I'll go coach here for a year or two, and then I'm going to get a coordinating job,
Right.
and then I'm going to be a head coach, right? And that happens. And I my first stop after Albion was obviously Bemidji State. I got very lucky and fortunate to get a GA, a graduate assistantship there. It was kind of funny story. Like I applied for it out of the blind, didn't know that I knew anybody there or had any connections there. The DC at the time reached out to me. I talked to him. He said, "Hey, have your references call me." So I was like, okay. I had Coach Rundle call, I had Coach Rayburg call, and then I reached out to Coach Arnold, who is out at Colorado State. He picks up the phone. He's like, hey, what do you need? And I was like, hey, Coach, just wanted to ask you real quick. I got you down as a reference. I know you said I could. Could you do me a favor? I got an opportunity to be a GA at Bemidji State University. Could you call the defensive coordinator for me? And he looked at he stopped. He's like, I'll do you one better. He goes, I'll call the head coach. He owes me a favor. And I was like, whoa, hold on. And he's like, I gave him his first full time job back in Montana. He's
Hmm.
got a national title under
Isn't
my
that
belt.
crazy? Those
Yeah, it's
connections.
nuts.
Isn't
It's
that
nuts, the
crazy?
connections. It's absolutely nuts. So he called him up. And from there, the head coach went over to the DC and told him, yeah, you need to bring him on campus. And really, the guy there at Bemidji that really kind of helped me in my foundation and in a coaching perspective was Brent Bolte. He was the co-DC. He was the linebackers coach. He's now the head coach there at Bemidji State. I love the dude to death. I love working for him for the 2 years I was up there. I loved everything about it up there. It was awesome. I enjoyed my time. But obviously, your GA is only a couple years, and at that point, it's like it's time to move on from there. But I learned a ton, on how to coach guys, how to get into the details, the recruiting aspect. Like that was one of the greatest things about the GA job up there was we got to do so many things. Like I had my own position to coach. I coached the D line. I was the assistant strength coach my first year there, and then became the strength coach there the second year because we rotated the GAs that way. And I also got to help out recruiting. Like I helped Bolte set up all of his Chicagoland recruiting. So I got to see a little bit of the lay of the land, like how this works on a bigger scheme instead of just being in state from that perspective. So I learned a lot from that stop, which was awesome.
It's different. It's interesting how the every GA job in the country is different.
Oh, yeah.
You get some places where you're that involved. Like when I was at River Falls, it was very similar. Like they were all in on letting me help out on whatever I wanted, and whether it was often whether it was doing studies on different offensive schemes or recruiting, graphics, all that stuff. It's crazy how and then you get places, I hear things from, my other coaching friends, which like, yeah, I helped set up the drills and then that was really it. You have to get kind of lucky with some of the spots, like how much you actually end up learning versus, okay, going here, I didn't really, you learn either way. Like you're going to learn
Yeah.
something, but it's crazy how, different schools approach their GAs in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate. It was baptism by fire for me. It was a drinking out of a fire hose. Let's figure it out and let's go. And I had similar experiences with guys that I knew that were GAs that like I was buddies with that all they did was set up drills. I mean, I remember my second year as a GA. I'm sitting there on an airplane down to the AFCA convention, and I'm talking to a GA at I think it was Duke or North Carolina, whatever, and I was asking him, I'm like, hey, so what do you guys do defensively and da 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 and all this? He's like, oh, well, I don't really know that. I'm like, you're a GA. What do you mean you don't know? He's
How do
like,
you
well,
not know?
I just work with the defensive tackles as a GA, and that's it. I just set up drills, and I'm like, wow. Like I at that point, that's when I realized I was like, I'm getting a lot more education on the football coaching side of things in my position, even though I might not be making as much money or it's not a Power Four or Division 1 school, but I'm getting a way bigger education on what it means to be a coach and how to go about things. And I took that very deep to heart on that piece. Like I'm super appreciative of my experience up there at Bemidji because those 2 years, I mean, I got a crash course on how to do a bunch of different things and how to go about stuff, and it really set the foundation for me, from that perspective on how to coach guys and get them better and work.
Right. You can sit here and say, okay, if this coach is at, and not to throw shade at any like big time coaches at the D1 level, but like to be honest, I mean, when you're a D3 or D2, young coach, you're going to be throwing a lot more than if you're, sometime and again, I haven't been at that level, but again, like you might just sit on your ass and break down offensive. Like if you're a defensive coach, you might just be sitting down and breaking down offensive film all day. Like
Yep.
that might be your job. And so like it's interesting how if you go to some of these smaller schools, you actually, you learn how to coach, maybe a little bit differently than if you're at one of those bigger schools.
Yeah, you do. You 100%. I mean, hey, I haven't coached at the Division 1 level. I've done some analyst work at the Division 1 level. I've coached D2, D3. Guys have asked me all the time, like, do you want to be D1? And I'm like, nah, I don't think so because I like being involved with a lot of the stuff. And there are a lot of places where at the Division 1 level you are involved, but then there are other places where you're 100% right. All they do is break down film and they set up drills and that's it. Or they run to the printer and grab the scripts or get coffee. That's all they're
Yeah.
doing. They're not really involved in it.
Just
And
describe my whole job at Simpson.
yeah, so but that's the difference. I mean, I was very fortunate to land a GA job that really helped, craft me and kind of mold me into the coach I am today. I got a lot of early experience that a lot of guys aren't fortunate to get, man. I mean, I recognize that. I was very fortunate. And that's why, like, anytime there are GA jobs open at Bemidji State, I tell, like, anybody that I know, like, hey, apply for that because you're going to get a lot of experience from that with the way they do things and how they operate.
Yeah. Let's talk about Grinnell just a tad because I think it's just an interesting, as far as a recruiting perspective.
Hmm.
Grinnell is the Harvard of the Midwest. That's just how it is. They have a very it's hard to get into. I couldn't get into it, that's for sure. And so from a recruiting perspective, let's talk about that a little bit. How was it difficult? Would you describe it as difficult recruiting there, or did you just have to kind of really narrow your search, when it came to trying to find, the right type of players?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of say that Harvard of the Midwest kind of quote, right, as a joke, but the reality is, if any D3 is the Harvard of Midwest, it is Grinnell College. I mean, when I got there in 2010, it was a struggle. They had not had a lot of success. I think the last winning season they had was maybe 2001, maybe, or 2002, something like that, and it was like a 5-5 season. I was a young, dumb coach. Like, I thought, I was like, oh, I was at Illinois College where I could get anybody in. I was like, I'll just out recruit people, whatever. I think in my 2 years time at Illinois College, I had myself brought in like 45 players in 2 years. I was like, I could do this. It's not that hard.
Hmm.
And the reason why I took the job was an opportunity to be a coordinator. Like, I went from being the special teams coordinator and D line coach at Illinois College to now I'm the defensive coordinator. And when I got there, it was a bit of a culture shock. Like, it was tough, really, really tough to get kids in. It wasn't nearly as tough as it was probably the last, 6 years that I was there. But it was still tough academically. I mean, we were talking about kids in 2010 with 27 plus ACTs,
Yeah.
that weren't getting admitted. I mean, it was really difficult. Now we had some that were under that, but not a lot. So it really, really, really narrows your pool down from a recruiting perspective and what you can recruit and who you can recruit because they got to be admitted first. It does you no good
Right.
as a coach to go recruit this phenomenal player if he's only got a 19 ACT. He's not going to get in. Those type of
Yeah.
things. And during my tenure there, my time there, like, that profile raised significantly. We were getting kids with 25s, 26, 27s, 28s, my first few years there. And then all of a sudden, about year 4, year 5, it was like those kids weren't admissible anymore,
Yeah.
just because of the academic profile of the institution had raised. I always kind of tell guys all the time, like, my last 2 years there, we had a 36 ACT, so a perfect score, get waitlisted. We had a 35 ACT get denied. We had a 1580 SAT get, waitlisted, so 20 points from a perfect score, and a 1530 denied. And a lot of it had to do with their writing samples and some of their course loads, those type of things. But it was very difficult. It was tough. A lot of, problems that we had from a roster standpoint was because of, there weren't just as many kids that had that profile. But also on top of that, if they did have that profile, they were looking at other high academic institutions like University of Chicago, WashU, the entire NESCAC, which is the Northeast Conference, which is kind of like we basically called them the mini Ivies. That's what they
Right.
were.
And if it's
Um,
if you're getting if you're if you're getting those kids in, but then you also haven't had the recent success, like a place like, you know, like Johns Hopkins, for
yeah,
example, like place
100%.
that has had a ton of success, and they're also like like you said, one of those mini Ivy schools, or like the University of Chicago, WashU, like you said, then it's like, well, if I really want to get like this, Ivy like degree and play football, then why would I, want to go to a place that hasn't had that success? And so you really had to, get the right kids at the
Yeah,
end of the day. Like,
it definitely takes the right kid. I mean, that was the biggest selling point was one, you got to find the academic kid that fits the profile, but then two, you got to convince them, hey, come to Iowa. Whereas, you talk about all those other institutions, John Hopkins, that's on the East Coast, major city. They got great facilities, all these different things. All the NESCACs are all in, great places on the East. You got WashU, which is down in St. Louis. You got the University of Chicago, which is like right downtown Chicago. And
yeah,
so like that's the tough part is like you're combating the academic profile. You're also combating the location, right? And then on top of that, the lack of success, makes it very, very difficult to do it. The other piece that was really tough there until probably the last 4 years is, 4 or 5 years that I was there, we were really operating in a structure that was very old and archaic.
mm,
Our head coach at the time was not only the head football coach, but he was the assistant track coach, right?
mm,
My assistant DB's coach was also the assistant baseball coach. So like
yeah,
reality is like I was working, I had other responsibilities as well. I was a defensive coordinator. I was a head strength and conditioning coach for 20 varsity athletic programs. I was a fitness center coordinator and I taught classes. So we all as coaches at Grinnell had a bunch of things on our plates that we couldn't just focus on football and football only in the recruiting piece, whereas some of our competitors like John Hopkins, WashU, Chicago, Amherst, those places, they had coaches that were only coaching football and recruiting for football, and that was it. So that also made it tough, and made it difficult because you're behind the eight ball with all those things, and you're trying to build something, and the success isn't coming right away, and you got to sell that to a kid like, hey, we're moving in the right direction. You got to believe us. You can help us. Those type of things. It makes it tough.
So then, what was kind of that transition like? You were there, you're at Grinnell for 12 years, and then obviously the opportunity opened up to, become the defensive coordinator at Simpson. What was that transition like? Was it difficult, being at a place for so long, and then, you kind of get into a routine for a long time, and then, now you're selling something different. You're recruiting different kids. Now everything's a little bit different. What was kind of that decision like, and then also just that transition?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the transition was very difficult for me. I had some very, very difficult moments in the fall of 2022 personally. I lost a couple family members suddenly, and I lost my dog that we all know how important our dogs are to us. You don't realize how important they are until you lose them. But my dog of almost 12 years, I ended up having to put down and lost him. So I was looking for a refresh at that point. I knew like I wanted to start somewhere new. Now, honestly, like the Simpson job, I wasn't even really like looking at it. I had known Coach Hoskins through connections. Me and Reed have met before. I actually interviewed for a job at University of La Crosse when he was up there. Those type of things. But actually, it's funny. Travis Rundle, who's now the head coach at Albion, was the defensive coordinator at Illinois Wesleyan the first year that Reed got there. So like I had connections, but I wasn't really looking. Like I saw the posts and I knew for him, like it was important to get back to Iowa. He had family here, his wife's from here, they're from Iowa, and it was an opportunity. And I literally shot him a text, said, "Hey, congrats, happy for you to get back to Iowa." And Reed texted me back. He's like, "Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm gonna give you a call tomorrow." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So when he, talked to me about the opportunity to come in and be the defensive coordinator here, you know, I interviewed, walked through this process. got to meet with Coach Bell, the athletic director here, and one of the things that sold me on it was not only Reed's vision of the program and where we're going and what we're trying to accomplish here, but also knowing that the athletic director was in alignment with that too, and he wanted it, right?
Totally.
Coach Bell told me, he flat out told me when I sat down and talked with him, like he's like, hey, listen, I got maybe 10 to 12 years left in my career. I want to be known as the AD that built a bunch of things and pushed all of our programs into conference championships and postseason play. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, this is different. Like at
Yep.
Grinnell, that wasn't the talk. Like it was just be competitive, have a roster, do those things. But that really excited me because, when I originally got into football, I wanted to give back, but I wanted to win. I mean, I'm competitive as all get out. Like that's what I want to do. And, I think having that interview process and going through it with him and being able to sit down with Coach Bell and then talk with Reed about what we're looking to do here, that really just kind of ignited that fire for me. Like I can get back into a highly competitive conference where we're going to get 2 teams a year, if not maybe 3, and we have a legitimate shot. If we win the conference, we got a shot at making a run for the national championship. So that's kind of what sold me on it. I mean, I know I kind of him and hawed a little bit with Reed, a little bit over it. Like it was, right after Christmas, like I came up and interviewed and I didn't really say anything. I was like, hey, I got to talk to the wife and all this other stuff. And then I was like, I'm going down to convention, and I wanted to talk to some guys, but then I got down to convention. I was talking with some guys and I was texting Reed. I was like, hey, who are we playing non-conference? And he's
Hmm.
like, oh, so are you in? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in, man. Let's do this. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, the transition was not hard for me. It was, hey, we got to come in and rebuild this thing, reestablish a culture. That was the biggest thing in year one. And then we had to recruit. I mean, we were a little bit behind the 8 ball with that first recruiting class just
Right.
because we got hired in December. Staff didn't come together until about mid to late January. So we did what we could. But in year 2, like we recruited our tails off. A big focus was Iowa, but then going out of state and finding some out of state players that can be impact guys was important for us too. So, but no, the transition was pretty easy. I mean, when you're working with guys that are like mind that are pushing that competitive greatness, right? And want to be great at it and everything they do and want to continue to get better, it makes it easy. I think that was the big thing I was missing from Grinnell. Like I was gun ho about football and I didn't have as many people around me that were, as competitive and wanting to push that envelope as much as possible. So that for me, when I got here was a refresh. It was an easy transition for me to get there.
You talk about Coach Bell. I remember when he first got hired, I was going into my senior year at Simpson, and I remember him, at the 3.5 years I had been there up to that point,
Mhm.
there had been no upgrades to the facilities, to, the coaching staff was pretty much the same. I remember he had his like introductory, message to the athletes, and he's like, we're gonna get the facilities. We're gonna get a complete upgrade. Everything's gonna be it's gonna be different around here. Essentially, I remember like he had been hired for like it felt like he'd been hired for like 2 days, and I was out there working out on the field one day, and this big semi truck brings in a big jumbotron, and I was like, well, he wasn't joking at all. And
No.
so and then you know after I graduated, went up to River Falls for 2 years, and then I come back and I'm like, goodness sakes, like he really wasn't kidding. There, if if you haven't seen, if you're listening, you don't know what I'm talking about, just go on Simpson website and just look at the differences between the the places. It's absolutely insane. But one of his big moves, Coach Bell's big move was hiring a new head football coach, and that was Reed Hoskins. And you know, Coach Hoskins, man, like when I was going through the process as well, I remember Coach Scott O'Dario, he called me and was like, "You interested in a receivers coach job at Simpson?" My first response was no. I remember where that place was. I'm not interested, but I was like, I wanna sit down with the head coach personally because I was curious with who they hired, also for some professional development reasons. And I remember just sitting down with Coach Hoskins and I was like, damn it, this guy's got a plan. Like he's got a vision and I want to be a part of it. So talk about your experience with working with Coach Hoskins and his ability to lead men, lead people, and you know, nurturizing, is that the right word? Nourishing
Nurturing. Yep.
the culture of a team. Talk about working for him and what it's been like working for Coach Hoskins.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, it's, it is one of those things that as a coach and as a leader of men, which we are as coaches, that's what we are. We're leader of men. We're developing culture. We're trying to, take these young men and make them positive, young men in society, right? It's not just football, and that's one of the things that I appreciate about Coach Hoskins so much is we relate a lot of things back to football, but a lot of times we have real, honest, serious talks that have nothing to do with football, and doing things the right way. And, if you're not going to do it right now, how are you going to, when are you going to have the time to do it right, later, and that's a big thing for me is, I appreciate when working with him, he's not going to be a point, finger pointer or any of those type of things, but he is going to challenge you to be better than what you were, and that's important. You know, we are very, very much a program where, if you make a mistake, okay, that's fine. Own it. All right. Own that mistake and then get better from it. Don't make excuses for that mistake, right? Don't make excuses. Be a better man. Own it, recognize it, and then correct it so that you can move on from it and continue to develop. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's been great for me as a coach is knowing that, hey, we're holding everybody to the same standard. We have
Yeah.
this, expectation from a culture standpoint. The standard is the standard, but it's not us as coaches that are creating that standard. It's our players and what the expectation is.
Yeah.
Now, our coaching staff is it's kind of our job. Like when the culture kind of gets off the rails a little bit, to steer it back and get it course corrected. But for the most part, he allows our players to have a voice. He allows us as coaches to have a voice. He may not necessarily agree with everything that we say, but he's
Mhm.
at least going to hear you out, from
Yeah.
that perspective and see your aspect and your perspective on it and why you think it might be better to do it a different way. And that's one of the things I appreciate the most. I mean, the other thing that I appreciate, I've been a defensive guy all the time. So when I look at things, I look through things from a defensive lens.
Hmm.
The greatest thing that I get from Coach Hoskins is we have our game plan meeting on Monday nights, and he's giving me ideas like, well, here's how I would do this or how I would attack it if you showed me this, and this. How would you adjust that? And I'm like, okay, it gives me a different perspective to look from, and it's not a perspective. It's not a challenging aspect. Like I'm challenging you to know what you don't know or what you do know, but it was more of like what are your thoughts? Like, if they make this adjustment, how can you play this better? Those type of things. So we take a lot from that, as a defensive staff. He challenges us to be better, to figure out ways to make it easier for our guys so that they can communicate and fly to the ball. But he also is a little bit old school too. Like he wants us to dent people and strike
Right.
and be physical. And that's one of the things I appreciate about it is like we talk so much ball. It's one of those deals that like, some people that are not coaches or not really in the profession don't understand like how can you talk that much football, but it's like we geek out about this stuff.
Hmm.
We love it, right? So it gives us new perspectives and they makes us look through other lenses. The leadership standpoint is phenomenal. This is probably the first program I've been about where we've really created these off-season leadership groups. We have a
Hmm.
leadership council that he meets with every week, talking through a book, challenging them, like how can we apply these lessons we're learning from the book to our team, all those things, and owning it, and going through that stuff. And I think that's important because at the end of the day, like we're trying to win football games, and that's what we're measured by, right? But we're trying to create a culture and create a team that is driven to be the best they can be and ultimately compete at the highest level. But after 4 years, we all know this game comes to an end for us, and you got to move on and be a positive impact in society. And I feel like that's what we're doing. We're building better men. We're not building just better football players.
He
And that's what I appreciate about him.
the thing about Coach Haskins, like I learned so much about football from him specifically, but I think for me and the things that I'll take away aren't really like it's not necessarily scheme related things. It's not necessarily there's life things that he really taught me. Like I remember there was a time during, the season where, I was a film guy, and we were having some issues with, some of the film, the new technology that we're having. And me being a second year coach, I was very aggressive with the student assistants, and I was very, I'm just like, what are we like? Why are we and with insert expletive here, here, and here, and I at the when this, there was a situation, and I kind of lost my shit a little bit, and you know, I go into, Coach Oskin's office to chat about it, just to kind of explain what was going on. And, instead of just turning it into, yeah, I'll talk to him, like from his perspective, instead of just, yeah, I'll talk to him, you're right. I mean, he challenged me and he said, you know, if you're going to coach for the next 50 years, or you're going to, whatever you do in your life, you're going to have to deal with people that don't think like you. And
Mhm.
that, that's one thing I really appreciated about him, is he didn't just like put it off to the side and just kind of let it be so that he didn't have to deal with it. He made me a better person and made me a better leader by actually saying, you know what, Seth, you need to quit being a douche and like get your shit, like, you need to learn how to work with these people. And the other, thing that I learned is he is not going to be a guy that just goes, yeah, you're right. Like, he's going to actually challenge you. Cause I remember we were evaluating, I was evaluating a freshman receiver, and I said, I think this kid's going to play for us day one, and he was a freshman. And Coach Hoskins was like, he's like, why do you think that? And I was like, I think it because of this. And he's like, well, I don't think a freshman can play. I don't know. I don't think a freshman can play right away. And then I said, well, this, and this. And so he really, like, he went at me to make sure that I knew exactly what I was talking about. And I learned so much more than if he just would have said, yeah, good. Like, that's a good opinion. And having to do it in front of the entire staff and having to actually like articulate what's going on. I appreciate everything that Coach Hoskins, instilled in me over the last, really year. So
Yeah, I mean, he does. He does challenge you in those ways. Like, why do you have that opinion? Why do you have that stance? Like, you need to be better in these situations. I mean, I similar story, right? Like, you did it in year two of Coach Hoskins' tenure, but you know what? In year one, I was pretty fired up on the sidelines in some different situations, right? And coach looked at me. He goes, "Hey, you need to move on. You need to adjust it and figure out what's going to work for our guys." And it was just, instead of me sitting there and stewing in my own frustration and anger, he challenged me to be better and grow from the experience. And I think that's one of the greatest things that he does. He challenges anybody and everybody that has a piece of our program that has comes in contact with it. It doesn't matter if you're, a football player, a coach, support staff, if you're the janitor, he's, if something ain't right, he's going to challenge you on that. Like, hey, what do we, like, I understand your frustration, but what can we do to fix it and be able to communicate with them better so that we don't continue to have these issues? And that's again, he says it all the time. You're going to make a mistake. That's not a problem to have a mess up, a mistake. But what are you going to do to correct that so that it doesn't continue to happen? How are you going
right,
to grow from it? And I think that's one of the most impactful things as young men, growing up through a program. You're going to be challenged in ways that you probably weren't challenged, through high school or whatever, because you might have been the dude or whatever it might be. And you're going to really grow from that. And it's beneficial because at the end of the day, when you get into your career at the age of 30, are you going to complain about you got passed up for this or that, or it didn't go your way, or are you going to do something to change that,
right.
and make sure that it does go your way the next time?
It's not. It's honestly crazy to think that Coach Hoskins is just finishing up his second year as a head coach, because like I never felt like, oh yeah, this guy's really. I can tell this is just his second year. Like, I don't feel that way at all. Like,
No.
it feels like he's been doing this for a while, which he has, but it's pretty wild to see. But let's move on to some scheme stuff, some philosophy stuff. Feel free to expand on this as much or as little as you would like. But I just kind of want to pick your brain about, you know, you had to really completely change the identity of the defense, right when you got there. Talk about, how did you try to build that identity from the ground up? And, deciding, what to run, how to run it. Obviously, you're comfortable with a particular scheme, but just kind of talk about building that identity, from the ground up.
Yeah, the first thing that we had to do when we got here was completely revamp the defense, right? I mean, let's be honest. It was not good. Even in year one, we weren't very good. We had a lot of challenges. Um, you know, whether it be injuries or just guys just understanding how you go about building things and doing things the right way. And communication was probably the biggest thing that we struggled with in that first spring and that first year was, hey, we got to communicate. We cannot just be out here in silos and not talk to each other and know what's going on. I mean, defense is completely different from offense, right? One guy, messes up on the defensive side, it's an explosive touchdown. You could have a guy completely run the wrong route, right? But it doesn't matter if the guy catches it, makes a guy miss, and scores, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you made a play, type of deal. So defensively, a lot of the things that we had to do in that year one, first spring and the first fall was really build confidence back into our guys. I mean, I think that was the biggest thing, but the communication piece is where the confidence came from. Our guys needed to learn how to talk to each other, how to trust each other and communicate, and then go out and execute. And we saw some changes in year one. We took some positive steps in the right direction. Things started to click a little bit for us, and then we had some injuries, right, that happened. But we stayed focused on that part. Like, hey, we're going to be physical, we're going to be tough, and we're going to communicate. You might be able to score points, you might be able to make plays here and there, but we're going to have a next play mentality and we're going to go out and play, and that was a big challenge for us was getting that foundation laid of like, hey, we are going to be a tough physical defense and we're going to communicate. And we saw really kind of come through in year two. We're still building towards that. We're not where we want to be. Not yet, not to our expectation, but we're still building towards that piece. But I think that was the biggest thing was, the confidence and the communication, aspect of things. I know
Yeah.
prior to us getting here, the defense was always to blame for stuff, right? Seth, you played here, right?
Hell
You,
yeah.
you guys,
I
you
never
guys,
seen 84 points in my life, and I saw it
right?
twice.
Yeah, and it was one of those things like there was a lot of turmoil and complaining back and forth and stuff like that. And I just flat out told our defensive guys that was one of the things that I nipped in the bud right away. Was like, listen, we're not going to point fingers here. If you're pointing a finger at somebody, you got three more pointing back at you. Right there, are you perfect? Nobody's perfect. So we had to
That's
try to
definitely
get
the
it.
hardest. That's definitely one of the hardest parts about like when the offense or defense is not, performing well and you start, pointing fingers and you start blaming other people. And, a book I've been listening to is Extreme Ownership. And obviously, you've read it and the Leadership Council at Simpson read it last year. And it's so true. Like if you are blaming others, no matter what part, whether you're a scout team linebacker or you're, an all American safety, like if you're pointing fingers at the offense or you're pointing fingers at, the corner that just gave up the play, like you're not gonna get very far. But if you start owning it, like I'm assuming that's one thing that you really had to say, like, hey, I don't care if the offense scores 0 points, we better go get a score, or we better go get a pick six. We better, and I think that was a difficult part, at the time. Is like if we weren't really doing well, it was all fucking offense, can't possess the ball. It's this stuff, but I felt like my experience at River Falls was completely different. Where like if we weren't having a great day on offense, the defense is like, we got you. Don't worry about it. Like we got you. And I think that's when you hear that as an offensive player, like your defense get like you're having a terrible day, like 3 points, 7 points, that you're going whenever it is, and you're like, not a good day. But you hear your defense go, hey, just hey, we'll give up as little as we can. We got your back. Let's fucking go. And so, I think that's a big deal to be able to get to the point where you're not pointing fingers, and you might say like, oh, like shouldn't that just be expected? But at times that has to be learned. That has to be coached.
Very much so. It does have to be learned and coached. And I mean, that was something that we, in the off season after year one, we kind of looked into some things. Obviously, the extreme ownership piece, going through that book. I mean, you give me too much credit here, Seth. I didn't read it. I audio booked it. I mean,
Hey, me too. That's what I'm
I
doing. I
audio
listen.
booked it. But I took a lot from that, and that's kind of where we came up with the put the ball down mentality. We don't care what happens. We don't care where the ball is. We're gonna go out and we're gonna play and we're gonna get turnovers and we're gonna turn it over, on downs or get turnovers. And I tell our guys all the time this is something that we echo all the time. Listen, guys, there is nobody more upset when the offense turns the ball, okay, than our offensive staff, our offensive coordinator, and our offensive players. What good does it do us to sit here and complain and whine about that on the sideline and point fingers when we should just have this put the ball mentality down and say, you know what? We got your back. We're going to go get you the ball back. Don't stress it. Make the corrections you need to make. We'll get the ball back for you guys and you'll go score. And that builds so much confidence
Yeah.
in your teammates. The offensive side knows that, and you spoke to it. Like when things aren't going well and the defense is like, we got your back, you're like, okay, as soon as they get the
Yeah.
ball back for us, we're going to go down and score this
Right.
time. It's the vice versa. I mean, there might be a time where we give up a score and it's an explosive because we misfit something. The offense comes back. Hey, don't worry about it. We're going to go down and score.
Right.
We'll get the lead back and go from there. And so that's a big focus for us in year two, and it came to play, and we're still working on that.
Yeah.
We did have some times in year two where some guys were letting some old habits creep in, and
Right.
I had to get into them a little bit on the sideline, like quit making excuses. All right, don't point the finger. Are you perfect? And that's a big piece of developing our culture here is like, hey, we're not going to be perfect, but we're asking you to get better every play, every rep, and continue to give everything you got on every rep, and then we'll let it kind of sort out from there. If we're doing that, we'll probably be in pretty good shape and win a lot of
Yeah.
games.
Let's talk about why the 3-4. It's obviously been popularized by the Steelers. Like that's they were obviously a big proponent of making that popular throughout the NFL, and obviously it's made its way into college football as well. Why is that? Why is that the scheme that you've decided to roll with for as long as you have? Over the years.
Well, it's kind of twofold. There's a few layers to this and why. I mean, growing up and playing football, I mean, I was actually in high school, we were a 5-2 defense.
Hmm.
It was essentially a
Don't see that
pseudo. Yeah,
anymore.
you don't see that anymore. But I also played in the age where, hey, it was all eye back and power counter and all that stuff. So, very rarely did we get a whole lot of spread stuff. But
There's some
I
similarities with 5-2 and
yeah,
3-4 a little
100%.
bit.
Really, when
Yeah.
I look back on it, it really is very
Right.
similar. Like it was a lot of 5-2 slant stuff and dropping guys out, those type of things. But I played through college a four down system, 4-2-5 and a 4-3. When I got to Bemidji State, that was the eye opener for me when I started to learn this 3-4 style of defense. Right. Um, I got to give, credit to where credit's due. I learned it at Bemidji, but we learned it at North Dakota. That's where we went over in the off season to clinic with, was the University of North Dakota. Dale Lennon, Bubba Schwager, Coach Schmidt, who's now the head coach at North Dakota now. He was an All-American linebacker there, won a national title. Like he was a part of that whole system. And it really did kind of developed over the years. We learned that style from them. And I've grown into more aggressive 3-4 stuff because of my connections with my, good buddy at Wally Kaczynski's up at University of St. Thomas. I've learned over the years, but when I was at Bemidji, we were a 3-4 and, we were aggressive. We did a bunch of different things. But then when I went to Illinois College, we went back to this 4-2-5 lock defense style. And we were constantly adjusting things, always having to, well, if they line up in this formation, we got to do this, we got to do that. And then it started like bothering me. I'm like, why do we have to adjust everything we do to what the offense does? Right. And then I start going to these coaches clinics. Right. And I'm listening, I'm the guy like early on as a young coach, I want to go to every defensive talk and learn something defensively. Right. But as I'm getting older as a coach, I'm starting to think, you know what? I want to go listen to what the offensive guys are talking about. What are they
Yeah.
doing? And that's when it started to dawn on me. All these offensive guys, like it, and I know it. What do they draw up? The first thing they draw up when they're talking about whatever
4-3 or
play,
4-2-5, baby.
4-3, 4-2-5. Why? They don't want to see odd front structure. They don't know where that fourth or fifth rusher's coming from. All these teams have gone to quarters and all these different things. Don't get me wrong, we have some quarter based coverages in our defense that we play with and some adjustments. But I started looking at it, I'm like, all right, all these offensive guys are talking about 4-2-5s or 4-3s, and they're playing quarters and doing all this stuff. Why aren't they drawing things up against odd front structure and middle of the field close stuff?
Yeah.
And it's because they don't see it on a regular basis and they don't know, like, they have to adjust all their rules. And I'm like, well, in our odd front structure, we're balanced up. We have an even amount of guys on each side of the ball, and we can adjust really easily to 2-by-2, 3-by-1, all that stuff. It doesn't take it doesn't change a bunch of our rules. And so that's when I started digging into it more in year two of Illinois College, where I was still running this 4-2 lock, defense. And I'm just sitting there. I'm like, all right, when I get the opportunity, I'm gonna go back to what I learned at Bemidji. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
back to that stuff because it's more balanced. It's tougher for offenses, those type of things, and that's what happened. When I got to Grinnell, I was like, hey, we're gonna do this, this, and this, and they looked at me like I was crazy. Like, I'll give you a prime example. I interviewed for the job at Grinnell. They had gotten beat by Monmouth the 3 previous years by a combined total score of 150 points to nothing. They had a dude on there that was phenomenal, Alex Tanney. The guy was an
Yeah.
elite quarterback. That dude can, the original trick shot. He's the original trick
Yep.
shot
That was
guy,
him,
right?
Alex Tanny.
He spent, I think, 8 years on the practice squad in the NFL for multiple teams. I think he's coaching in the NFL right now, if I remember correctly, or Division One. I can't remember, but I told him, I was like, listen, you guys hire me, we'll beat them. And they kind of looked at me like, man, this guy's crazy. And we went to that place. We went down to Monmouth. I think it was the third game of the year, and we beat them. We beat them 17-15 on their home turf. It was their homecoming. Coach Bell, who's now the head coach at Augustana, was going for his 100th career win. Tanny had done all these things against Grinnell, and everybody in the league was dropping 8 on him. And as a quarterback, eventually somebody's going to come open, right? Because you have no pressure.
Hmm.
So we blitzed him. We knocked him out of it was the second play of the game. We ran a stunt. We knew, like, you couldn't beat this guy, but you could beat his offensive line.
Yeah.
Their O line wasn't, very good protection wise, and we got a guy up underneath a twist stunt and hit the quarterback, hit Tanny, separated his AC joint. He was out of the game, and we won that ball game 17-15. And that confirmed to me right then and there, we're going to be a 3-4 defense. We're going to be a pressure based team. I'm going to continue to grow and learn in this, and I'm going to continue to reach out to the guys I know that are running these styles of defense and find new things to add to our package so that we can be aggressive, and take kind of ownership back, as far as, play goes. Because, I mean, you and I know, like, this day and the age, the rules have been bent in favor of offensive guys scoring more points because nobody wants to watch a 12-8 ball game anymore. I did. Hey, that
Do you
Patriots,
still? Do you
uh,
still like watching that?
it gives me some stress. It does
You
give me
gotta
some
go watch
stress.
it. I was at the Iowa Nebraska game
Yep.
this past winter now, or this past November. It was basically winter, but I was like, "Fuck, you gotta love football to watch this shit." But
Yep. You do. But I mean,
but
that Super Bowl that the Patriots were in where they beat the Seahawks 12-8, I geeked out on that. I loved it, because it's two great defensive minds battling two of the best offensive guys. And I know some guys are like, yeah, that was the most boring Super Bowl in the world. But the reason why the rules have been changed is because, they want to keep fans in the stands and they want to keep the attendance up and those type of things. So for me, it's like, hey, how can we combat those things that have been changed in favor of the offense? And that's us being aggressive and being multiple in what we do. I mean, Christ, in the last 5 years, I've grown even within our scheme of having more nickel package where we're not always an odd front structure.
yeah,
We're in some even front and doing some different things and movements and stuff like that. So that was a big thing for me. The selling point on it was we're multiple. We can do a lot of stuff. You don't always know where the fourth or fifth rusher is coming from. And you can do a lot of different things that don't really break all your rules. Where, if you're a 4 down guy, and don't get me wrong, there are great 4 down defenses out there, that you can get at. Iowa does a great job with what they do. They are developed up front. They get after it. They're going to stop the run and limit explosive plays. But I think one of the big things, and one of the other reasons why this is kind of the second part, why I'm big on the 3-4 stuff, is I think it's very difficult to find those 3 techniques and those 1 techniques, enough quality interior defensive linemen at our level, it's tough to find those guys that can play at a high level when you run across more of the safety hybrid types and you can be really athletic and fast. So, and I know if a guy has a really good three technique or a really good one technique and they got the measurables, they're probably getting snatched up by a scholarship program. So,
Right.
that's the other part of it is like I find it easier for us to find some of those hybrid type bodies and then we can figure out where they play within our scheme and we can be really fast and we can run, and I think
Right.
that's important. That's the other aspect of it is like I come across more of those hybrid types at our level that can be really good players for us. Whereas, at the other levels, they might not be a great player because they don't quite fit the mold of what they're looking for in a rush D end or an outside back or whatever it may be. So that's kind of the second piece to it for me is like, hey, outside of the scheme part, what offensive guys are talking about, you know, the recruiting aspect is an important part of that, like being able to find the right type of bodies that can run and play for you. Plus, that also helps your special teams. Like I think that's one of the big things that a lot of guys don't realize is if you got more of those linebacker safety types, you're going to be a lot faster, a lot more explosive on special teams than if you have a bunch of big body guys that are just plugging up holes and letting linebackers make plays.
Right. That's the interesting thing about, how you've kind of personneled up your outside backers. This
Hmm.
past season, you had two receivers playing out there, two former receivers playing your outside backer spots. And, it's kind of matching that, speed versus those big, you get a big right tackle or a big left tackle out there. It doesn't move very well. Well, it sure helps having essentially uh, a stockier, after you develop them, receiver being able to bend and being able to get a good first step on one of those guys versus, like you said, like a rush end where, if he's got even if he has one or two moves that are lethal, it's still like, well, you still got to get around that big dude and you're still big. But, I think that was the interesting part for me with, just, talk about CJ again, but like that type of body where you're bringing a receiver down to play a linebacker. I was like, that looks stupid. But at the end of the day, like, shit, like it's when you get a guy that can bend and run like that, it's it's
It's
hard for those
tough.
big guys for
It
sure.
really is. Yeah, it is tough. And I mean, in our mind, like, yeah, CJ, we didn't know CJ as a receiver.
Right.
We knew CJ as a safety, right? Same with
Right.
Mason Little. Like, we didn't know May as a receiver. He was a safety.
Yeah.
So yeah, finding those guys, I think you find guys that can bend and run. That's important on defense. Um, because at the end of the day, as an offensive guy, it's all about numbers and leverage and how can you expose the defense from that level. And, if you can outrun guys, then you're in great shape. And I never get caught up in the cookie cutter stuff as far as like what a guy needs to be for, to play outside back or DN for us. That's the other thing with our defensive line. I want guys that can bend and move. If you're 5'10" and you're 220 pounds and but you can move, you got a quick first step, and, Nolan Pagel, I'm going to take you.
Yeah.
I'm going to find a way to get you on the field. That's not your prototypical nose tackle in a 3-4. Most of the guys, when they hear we're a 3-4, they're like, oh, the D line just two gaps and plugs it up. It's like, no, we're moving these guys. They're
Right.
athletic. They can move. We're expecting them to move. And I think that's an important piece of it, too, is like you get a lot of movement, a lot of chaos, a lot of mayhem. As we talk about, as a defense, we want to create mayhem on the field. Well, how do you go about doing that? You try to go and find the fastest 11 guys that communicate and play well together, and then you just get after it. And sometimes those outside backers are outside backers in high school. Sometimes they were
Yeah.
safeties. Sometimes they were, receivers. Sometimes those inside backers were inside backers in high schools, but sometimes they're running backs. They're
Yeah.
guys that might be pounders as a running back, but as an inside backer, they're really good at seeing the hole and seeing where they're opening up, and they know where the cutback lanes are, and they can play off the ball. Those
I
type of
really
things.
enjoyed recruiting the 3-4. Like I really I appreciated recruiting that style of defense. Like offensively, it's like, yeah, you want the biggest possible offensive lineman that you can get that's
Hmm.
also, not just big, but also can bend well. But, and you want fast, tall receivers and a quarterback with a strong arm. It's not that complicated. Let's be real. But defensively, I really enjoyed recruiting that spot because I would go into high schools and I'd look at a slot receiver I was going in there recruiting, and he would be asking me about the offense. And I'm like, well, you know, two of our, he's like, I'd be open to play either position. I'm like, you know, both of our outside backers were receivers, and I could see, their face lights up. They're like, what? I'm like, no, that's kind of the way we do things. Like I've seen linebackers go down and play, D line. I've seen, outside backers end up playing safety because they just move super well. I genuinely enjoyed recruiting, you know, that style of defense.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it creates a lot of things, and it's like, that the big thing with that, with our style of defense, is you can find guys to play the position or play multiple positions within the defense, and that's a big thing, is like being able to, like, hey, in a perfect world, yeah, I would like all of our boundary corners to be 6'3" plus and long, like, K1, but we don't live in a perfect world, so we got to find guys that have really good technique and that are going to be a little bit longer, but
Yeah.
we can get away with a smaller corner out at the field side, those type of things, but being multiple and being able to move guys around and spin guys around and do different things is awesome. I mean, there are times where, like, yeah, CJ's an outside backer, but we get in our nickel package. He's a rush DN, a stand up
Right.
five, and he's getting after it, and that's tough for an offensive lineman. That has to move in space to deal with a guy that can, run, pretty well and bends really well. Those type of things. I mean, CJ's
Yeah.
always been towards the top of the fly 10 times and all that stuff and the change of direction time testing that Coach Schmitz and them do. And that's what we're looking for. We're going to try to find guys that have high end speed that can run to the football, because at the end of the day, it's about tackling, right? And we got to cover every square inch of the field. I mean, Coach Aldinger does a pretty good job of talking and explaining to recruits, like, listen, we're going to attack, we're going to attack deep, we're going to attack intermediate, we're going to attack short, but we're also going to attack in the middle of the field, the outside of the field. So now defensively, we're having to cover every square inch of the field.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you got a bunch of guys that can't run, that becomes pretty tough, pretty difficult to do. So, for
Right.
us, it's just like, hey, how many fast pieces can we find, and then figure out where they fit best within the scheme, and go from there. And I've had guys like, listen, I'll tell you this, I know in your day you'd be like, I don't know about that, coach, but we've had quarterbacks that end up playing safety within the scheme because
The
they
best
know.
safety I've ever been around was a safety. His name's Aaron Borgading, played at River Falls. He's the best safety I've ever been around. Master communicator. I mean, just a physical cat. And he came in as a quarterback. And I mean that for sure.
Yeah,
For sure. I
you
believe
know,
in that.
you know, it's those things, like, you just try to figure out ways, and I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, there's usually only about one quarterback or maybe two that are going to play in the game. If you got a quarterback line that's 8 deep, how are you gonna get on the field, buddy? Those type of things. And so we're always trying to find guys that can be multiple and make switches and play in different positions and play with speed and utilize their skill sets to the best of their ability. I mean, I think that's an important piece. Like, that's where the cookie cutter stuff goes out the window for me. Like, I just can't do it. Like, I don't tell me what they can't do. Let's figure out what they can do and let's execute it.
Yeah. One thing, as far as, pressure based system, not saying this is you, but a generalization would be that, okay, they're not sound against the run. How how do you feel? How do you build a pressure package with still being sound against the run?
The numbers. And what is the offense? How are they aligning, and what are the numbers in the box? One of the things that I always, hang my hat on is, listen, a lot of people are going to talk about stop and run. We want to suffocate. It's easy for guys to say we're going to stop the run and then be in a 3-4 defense, and those overhangs are split out wide. Typically in 10 personnel stuff like that, we're going to have those guys be close to the box. We have run fits. We have everything fit from that perspective. We have reads within our pressures. But when guys start adding to the box, that's when we're going to start adding to the box. If you're going to add a tight end, we're going to add a safety or a corner, right? If you add two tight ends, we're going to add another guy, right? So we're trying
Mhm.
to be plus one in that situation. We have fits, we don't talk about gaps when it comes to things. We talk about reads with our pressures and how we read things. If he does this, you do that. If he does that, you do this. We try to really simplify it as much as possible. I'm a firm believer to keep our coaching cues down to a minimum. Like, I don't want to give as a young coach, I gave a lot of coaching cues because that's
No
what you think
doubt.
it is, right? You think, oh, I got to talk to him, talk to him, talk to him all the time. And
No doubt about it.
a lot of times they get the spinning and they're like, I don't know what coach wants me to do.
Sometimes coaches just I had one of my buddies on, he's a strength coach now, and he was talking about some coaches just like talking. They just and my first year, my this past year was my first year leading my own room, and the only year. But there was times where I was just like, I have been talking up here for 15 minutes, and I think they stopped listening 14 minutes ago. And so I think it's yeah, the having your coaching cues to a minimum so guys can play fast. I just think that's worked so much better. Like me as a quarterback, when there would be a coach that I'd have not thinking of anybody specific, but like there was the ones that are like go on and on and on about these different defenses. And then, my quarterback coach at River Falls, who's also the head coach, Coach Walker, he was just like, can you throw it to that guy or not? No? Okay, great. Hand it off. You know what I mean? Like it's just that sort of way of doing things. And I played so much faster. I played so much more relaxed than when I was like, uh wait a minute. Was it quarter half? Oh, or was it no, it was definitely cover two. Oh wait, no, actually I think it might have been three cloud. No, but you know what I mean? So there just
Yep.
gets to be too much just coach talk
Yeah,
at a certain point.
it's too much for them to process, and that's why I harp with our defensive staff a lot of times is like, hey, cut down the coaching cues, make it simple, because clear minds equal fast feet. If we have clear minds and we're running with fast feet, we can correct the mistakes they make if they're making quick decisions, right? And that's why the coaching cues have got to be so cut down and precise. Like, let's not overcomplicate this. At the end of the day, this game is simple. It's about tackling the football. It's about breaking tackles. It's about catching the ball. Let's try not to overcomplicate this for these guys. Now, we can geek out into the scheme stuff as coaches as much as we want, but not all your players are going to be like you when it comes to that.
Right.
That's why we're coaches, right? You do have, when you have special players that want to be the best they can be, they are on that same kind of level mindset wise of trying to learn everything. But
Yeah.
not every guy's like that. And some guys just want to play and they want to go fast. And it's like, why are we taking away what they do well, which is run fast to the ball when we're overcomplicating it? If we can be clear minds, fast feet, we can correct mistakes a lot easier than us trying to overcoach it, from that
Yeah.
standpoint and go from there. So that is a big thing for us. And, I think it's important, you have to have that, that aspect, when it comes down to it to be successful.
One of the things, now to further geek out on the scheme stuff, one of the things that I hated going against, or something that I just could not stand, on a scheme wise, is sim pressures.
Mhm.
I just despise playing against sim pressures because it's as a quarterback, you now I wasn't really tied into picking up blitzes, picking up pressures, but I understood what was going on, when I was playing. And if I saw a creeper or I saw someone coming, like I always knew, okay, I'm getting the ball out hot. And so when especially when I look to my right side, being a right-handed quarterback, I'm like, okay, if he comes, I'm hot off him right away. So it's like, great, all right, and then I'm like, okay, great, like he backs off, fine, okay, now I got time, to kind of go through a read, but shit, then you got something coming from another way. My question is, you know, how do you integrate, without, you can go into as much detail as you want. How do you go about, finding the right time to, let your sim pressures go? And, how do you build kind of those packages up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, you got to have it, within your scheme. You can't be pressure, 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 5 and 6 man pressures all day. Unless you are going to play cover one rat in the hole and you have a bunch of dudes that can run all over the place and cover everything up, then you can just get into 5 and 6 man pressures and do what you do. But I think there has to be a balance to it. It's to me, it's just like calling an offense, right? You're getting run game, and they're loading up the box. Well, what are you going to probably do when they're loading up the box? You're going to try to spray it out, to the sideline on whatever screen game or whatever quick RPO that you can get out there, right? So for us, it's when we talk about simulated pressures, we call them creepers. That's what they are for us. We want to give the illusion that we're bringing 5 or 6, and then really be able to drop guys out into those windows that they think are going to be open, or drop or spin somebody down, whatever it is, and take away the hot read. That's important for us. I try to mix it up. I'm not going to sit here and say we do it mostly on third downs or first downs. We try to be multiple in the way we're going and how we're going about it. From that perspective, I do think there's a ton of value in them. It's all the benefits of pressure, but none of the risks of pressure. I try to be multiple in that regard. There are going to be downs where, like, hey, series where I'm saying, hey, we're pressuring the whole time, and then maybe the next series I'm bringing some creepers from here and there.
Hmm.
But I think the biggest thing with creating those sims, those creepers, those packages, is you have to make them look like your pressure based stuff, right? I think that's important. It can't look like something that is completely separate, because as an offensive guy, you see that on film. They're like, well, every time they line up in this front, this is what they're doing. They're not bringing more than 4.
Right.
Or anytime that this guy walks up, he's always pressuring, and he's the hot read, whatever it may be. So, trying to create those illusions. I do like them on early downs, from that standpoint. But I also like pressuring on early downs, because I'm a big believer of getting guys, offensive guys, behind the sticks on first and second down, what we call non-circumstantial downs. To us, if you talk to an offensive guy, an offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, what's the number one goal on first down? 3 yards or more, right? If
Right.
we gain 3 yards or more, that's a positive play for us. What's the goal of second down? Get half the distance of of second down, so that we can get third and manageable. So for
Yep.
us, it's like, hey, how can we create these issues from first and second down? Really get them behind the sticks, and then are we going to pressure on third? Are we going to simulate on third? Those type of things, and being able to be a multiple in that regard. So I think you got to, from the simulated pressure package stuff, you got to have multiple ways to attack things. You got to give multiple fronts.
Yeah.
You do have to have on the back end multiple coverages. From that standpoint, I think that's one of the big things that we do a really good job with, is packaging that stuff, giving the illusion that it all looks the same, but really, hey, on one down we might be running, a 5-man pressure and playing middle of the field close, but then on the next down we're giving the illusion of a 5-6-man pressure, but then all of a sudden we're playing Tampa 2. Those
Right.
type of things. So that's the biggest thing for us, is say, how much can we make everything look the same and create the issues that create conflict for the quarterbacks and their decisions, but also gives really cloudy reads to the O line, and attacking them. So
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing with that stuff, is like, being multiple in that regard, but making it all look the same, so that you don't really get they don't get a beat on you about what you're doing and how you're
Yeah. It's one of those things that if you're gonna have one thing, you gotta have the other. And if
going.
you don't have it, then I feel like you're at a disadvantage
Big time.
when it comes to that. So I think it's like I said, if you're gonna be a you're gonna be a pressure based team, you're gonna have to have a couple sim pressures that just mimic that other stuff. But I want to get your thoughts on this. Over the years, like we kind of mentioned right off the get, is offenses. It feels like they change so much every year. For like I said, a long time, it was run the rock, and there wasn't really another way of doing things. And then Mike Leach and you know that kind of coaching tree really popularized the air raid, and then really is when the RPOs and those sort of things started to come about. And then now it's really starting to get back to those pro style systems. How have you seen offenses evolve over the years? Because a lot of times defenses do change and they do evolve, but they're not as drastic as from the outside view. They're not as drastic as offenses where it's like, shit, now they're in 10p, and then now they're there's all this different stuff. How have you had to adapt to that stuff over the years?
Yeah, I do think, as coaches, defensive coaches especially, we're always kind of a little bit behind the 8 ball. Because offenses are trying to evolve and do different things and attack the rules and create conflict, right? The old school power eye pro formation stuff. I love that stuff. Like, that was like, hey, you're in that, great. I love it. Like, let's play some smash mouth football and let's
Right.
get after it.
built for the 3-4,
Yeah, built
right?
for the three
Built to
four,
go
one
against
hundred
that.
percent, 100%. But then you got the evolution of the air raid and all those things, and how Mike Leach was very much like, hey, we run 3 plays, and this is what we do, and we have this, and this is how we adjust from it if they do this or do that, right? That gets back to the whole clear minds equal fast feet. Don't overcomplicate it, right? And then you get the RPOs, and now what we're seeing is a little bit more of that evolution back to some of the smash mouth stuff,
Yeah.
GY counter, power, GT counter, those type of things, a little bit of I. We're not
And I'm
getting,
here for that. And
yeah,
that's as a pass game guy. I'm here for that.
yeah,
Like I love that. I'm glad that that's
yeah,
I'm glad that's kind of starting to make its way back into normal practice.
yeah. It is, and that's the thing is now you're getting these boxes, right, that are a little bit more loaded, and so for me, as a defensive guy, I'm always trying to figure out what's the next trend, what is the next thing that people are getting to, so that we can be a step ahead. Like, I think that's one of the nice things about our system and the way we play is because we're balanced up on both sides. We have the ability to play multiple offenses. I mean, in the American Rivers Conference, we see the whole gamut. You got programs that are running 12 personnel and running mid zone and power, and you got others that are running counter, GY counter, you got some that are running RPOs off all that. Then you got the full spread air raid stuff and everything else. So we see everything for the most part. I mean, shoot, Luther this past year got into some funky stuff where they were running some, old wing T kind of formational stuff. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very, things evolve back. Like everybody thinks like somebody invented something new, but the reality is it's just a tweak on something that
Right.
happened before. But I'm always trying to figure out like, hey, what are we going to see more of, in the next year? And a lot of it's player, personnel driven from that perspective, based off of the team. But I mean, I'm always trying to stay one step ahead, from that standpoint and trying to see what's the new thing. I mean, for a few years there, the new thing was duo, right? Everybody's running duo.
Right.
So let's not get
Right.
into that argument because some guys it's like it's power, and other guys are like it's inside zone, dude.
Don't get me going on don't get me going on this. It's power with no puller.
Yeah,
Coach Boyer is totally
I
against me on that, but
I
that's just
agree. I agree
it's
with you.
what it is.
It's
Well,
power with
thank
no
you.
puller. I
Thank you.
agree with you.
It's true. It's
It's
power with no
different.
puller.
It's power with no
Running
puller,
back is
but
working front side, the center is working backside, like
yeah,
is working back
yeah,
whatever.
100%. But the evolution stuff is like, I've been, not to be like, I've seen it all because I haven't seen it all, but I've been around enough that I've seen quite a bit of ball. And I remember the days coaching against two back, pro style stuff to having to evolve to spread and, empty and all that stuff. So, the nice piece is, I've seen quite a bit of it. I've even seen double wing split back veer like that. That's a
Love it.
pain. And, that's tough. If you could be physical and run that you can really own a lot of games and be really competitive in those things. But it's tough. The offensive guys get to do all these things. I mean, Coach Aldinger, you spent a year with him. He's running 4x1,
Right.
3x2 empty into the boundary. All of a sudden, we're going 3x0. Then we're going taxi over with a tackle over. We're doing all these different things.
Right.
I tell guys all the time, like Coach Aldinger is the bane of my existence in spring ball and fall camp because I got to have all
Right.
these adjustments and checks and be able to play these things and be able to adjust to it. But it
Right.
sets us up defensively for a lot of stuff in the season when
Right.
we see it. It's like, oh yeah, whatever, that's camp. We already saw that, guys. Don't worry
Right.
about it. We
That
just
was
do
day
this.
that
Yep.
was day 2 install for the offense, and
Yeah.
that was you know what I mean?
Stay two install, bump the front, we're good to go. Like, let's go.
Right.
Those type of things. So, I do think the one thing that can be difficult for a lot of young coaches, especially on the defensive side, is we're constantly so ingrained in our own defensive system that we just get so narrow focused and we're not seeing what's going on, what's the trending thing happening outside. And that's one of the things that I'm always trying to do as a defensive coordinator and as a defensive coach is I'm trying to see like what are these offenses getting to? What are they doing, right? Like why do I go and listen to offensive guys talk at clinics? Because I want to see what they're doing. I want to know what they're thinking so that once I get out of there I can be like, all right, well this is how we can manipulate that, this is how we can attack it. This is how we can create conflicts for the quarterback or the running back, whoever it may be. All those different things. So,
What
um,
do you think what do you think's next? What do you think's the next thing? Cuz right now it's certainly, Michigan especially is really they kind of brought back that power football. They're
Yep.
running counter, they're running a lot more gap schemes than
Gap
you've seen
scheme,
recently.
duo, those type of things.
Right? A lot of yeah. What do you think is next?
I think a lot of teams are starting to move back to more 11 and 12 personnel stuff. I think that's a lost art. Like I really do. I think good offensive coaches and offensive staffs and good offenses have a lot of 11 and 12 personnel. They can get into 10, but I think a lot of teams are going to start moving more towards the 11 and 12 personnel stuff. Um, because let's think about it, for the better part of a decade, all we've been seeing defensively is spread, right? Spread, air rated out or whatever it may be, RPOs, all that stuff. They're gonna get into more 11 and 12 personnel. They're still gonna have some air raid or spreads, scheme to it, but it's gonna be more, GY counter, GT counter, maybe some power out of that stuff. The quarterback run game, I think as quarterbacks become more athletic,
Yep.
more physically put together, that's the stuff that's going to create more issues.
Right.
Obviously in the spread system with the RPOs and the zone read stuff, when with Oregon when they were at their heyday, with Chip Kelly and all that stuff running the quarterback, you got a little bit of that. But what you're starting to see a little bit more of
Right.
it is the quarterback power, quarterback counter game.
Totally.
That stuff is going to probably be, I think, the next kind of step in the evolution of offenses out of 11 and 12 personnel stuff, and that's
Yeah.
creates
I've
issues
been
for
lucky.
defenses.
I've been lucky to play in a scheme like that, and coaching a scheme like that because at River Falls, that was our jam. It was, we're running the quarterback at 11 personnel. We're adding a gap. We're using the running back as our main RPO threat. Like it is, and
It's tough.
it is really hard to go against because that means you truly have to defend the entire field. I think you're definitely going to start to see more teams recruit, quarterbacks that are going to, you know, not like right, not just be out in space in the zone read game, but they're gonna be running like quarterback pin and pull. They're gonna be running quarterback counter, and it's not gonna be like your bash stuff. It's gonna be like they're adding the running back into the fit, and it's
Yep.
gonna. I think that's you're gonna see a lot more of that coming up, and I
I,
think you're
yeah,
totally right.
we have, and we've seen a little bit of it, in the American Rivers, not a ton, but some of that's just personnel driven. Some guys, some coordinators are really scared to run their quarterbacks because they don't want to get them hurt, those type of things. But I think you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to see a lot more of the kind of a little bit, bigger, more built, stockier quarterbacks, but they're still athletic and they can run and they can throw the ball. They can get those rotations on the football and get it out there, but they also are a run threat, and that creates issues for a defense big time. I mean, because now you got to account for the quarterback in the fit because you got a running back that's kicking somebody out or leading up, whatever it may be.
Right.
Now you got to defend all 11, and that's tough. It used to be in the days when you had it and it was just pure drop back or even the zone read stuff out of the spread, like you could 3-step charge the mesh and take a quarterback out of the equation really easy because they were just running inside zone. That was it.
Right.
Now with the power and the counter game and all those things and evolving that piece, it makes it difficult and tough on a defense to defend. And I think we're going to probably see a lot more of that in the next few years. We've seen a little bit of it. Like, there's some teams in the American Rivers that decided to, start running their quarterbacks a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it makes it tough, because now you got to account for that extra hat in the box with the running back. And that's tough, because then if you overcommit to it, now you're, out leveraged out on, in space, and they have numbers and they can just, take that thing, rise up and get it out there, and it's boom, boom, boom. And I think one
Right.
of the biggest things, that is really impactful is, the offensive side of the offensive side of the ball has done a really good job of developing and teaching these kids, especially at the quarterback position, at a much younger level than the defensive side has done with combating those things.
Yeah.
We have to do a better job of like teaching these guys scheme and how the things fit, um, and how we need to attack things and read things. And I think that's the one thing that the offense is always going to kind of be a step ahead of us a little bit because, I mean, you were an eighth grade quarterback, you were taught how to read cover two and cover three.
Hmm.
Back when I was in high school, it literally wasn't like that. Like they could read it by the time maybe they were a junior or senior, but they weren't taught
Yeah.
that in eighth grade. Those type of things. And it was just like, hey, is that guy open? Throw it to him. If
Right.
not,
It's
you
a
know,
it's definitely a lot more, you know, right. Back in the day, it's definitely a lot more pure progression. It's,
yep,
we've been running these plays for 30 years, and it's 1 to 2 to 3 to probably run the ball. And it's probably off of a boot or some sort of play action. And yeah, now, especially with how the air raid's popularized, like it is like I was never in an air raid system, but I've always been fascinated with like the Lincoln Riley's way of doing things where it's get your eyes to, you have like a zero read out here, which is a pre-snap read. That's like if you can take it, go with it. And then immediately on the snap, you get your eyes like the Y cross stuff. You go right to the cross. If the cross isn't there, okay, that means that somebody else took it away. Okay, who took the cross away? Okay, was it the alley backer that trailed the cross, or was it the flat defender that was originally on the out? And based on that, okay, then I'm gonna whoever covered the cross, that's where my next read takes me, and so on and so forth. Versus like I said back in the day, it's 1 2 3 and rip it. So I think that way of doing things, I think, is fascinated me, and it's also it's like you said, it's being taught when they're so young
yeah.
nowadays. It's crazy. But what is one of those schemes that, just a couple more questions. We'll get you out of here. Obviously, you got a
Oh,
busy day, but
no, hey, don't worry about the time. I'm here for this, and I'm not like worried about everything. I got my next thing
okay,
is at 4 o'clock. So
perfect. Okay, well, we'll keep rolling. Um, what is, one of those schemes that, you love facing? Like when you see a scheme or an offense, you're like, oh, like this is our jam. And what's one of those that you're like, fuck, this is gonna be a bitch?
yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, hopefully, there's not too many American Rivers,
Not
coordinators,
yet.
offensive coordinators on this watching this. But for me, I've always been, hey, the pro style offense. You want to get and run power and counter. You want to do that stuff. I'm all about that. I love that stuff. Like, let's get into that because defensively, we are built for that stuff and the way we attack things. I love being a part of that party. Like that's my jam right there. But the things that create issues and kind of give me a little bit of frustration at times is some of the empty stuff. That can be a little bit difficult at times. It's not that we don't have answers. It's just like sometimes you're just gonna give up some of those quick ones that just kind of frustrate. It's like a gnat when you're out at summer on the lake, right? That just keep coming around and bugging you. You're like,
Yeah.
I can squash you, but why do you keep annoying? I don't want to keep dealing with you type of deal. So
Right.
um, those are the things that kind of create challenges. Is like how are you gonna attack empty? The one thing that I've kind of learned from some guys that I've coached with and peers is you got to have multiple facets to attack empty. You can't just sit
Totally.
back and play, coverage and do that stuff. And that's where kind of the evolution of kind of the Sims kind of came through. Some of those things, being able to simulate pressure, but also being able to bring pressure out of that stuff and do some different things. Um, there's not a real base scheme thing that really bothers me. The big thing that that becomes kind of time sensitive, right? And this from breaking film down is when a team gets into multiple formations and they're just running
Hmm.
everything. It's the flavor of the week offense. That's the
Right.
frustrating part because you don't know if you got 4 games of tape on them and you've broken it all down, but they're running a completely different system or scheme every week, and then they're
Right.
getting into a bunch of different formations. It's just like you only get so much time with your guys. So you got to really, really narrow it down and sift through all that stuff to find out what they're really good at.
And
Um,
that's probably what they're going to end up doing is,
yeah,
if you're going to run all these different formations, you can only spend so much time on stuff.
exactly.
And so, more than likely, their base scheme is probably not going to be that overcomplicated. And they're probably just running the same shit out of a lot of different
And that's
formations.
what it tends to be a lot of times. But yeah, I would say kind of the two things that kind of frustrate is like the empty stuff that can be a little bit of it's not really that we don't know how to adjust to it. It's like it's just annoying. Like you're just getting in the empty because you don't want us to load the box up, which I get it, right? It's about numbers and leverage, right? I get that part. But the multiple, kind of different offensive schemes and formations, when a team does that stuff over 4 or 5 games, and then you got to prepare for it, and it's just a bunch of data that you got to go through and do all this different stuff. That can be a pain, just more game planning for it than anything. That can be kind of frustrating at times. It's like, man, all right, we're going to see 20 different formations from these guys. They're running the same stuff out of it. If the back's to the tight end, they're running this. If he's away from the tight end, they're running this. It doesn't change, but you got to have your guys prepared for all those different formations and how to align to it correctly. That's the probably the frustrating piece. More so than anything from a scheme perspective.
Yeah. I think, with I think every defense has to have some sort of pressure concept. Like you're not just going to be able to sit there. There's certain teams like, that are in the crush that really are just going to sit in that all game. But what's one pressure concept that you think every single coach at every level should at least have in their toolbox?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I think everybody does, but maybe they don't. I think the one thing that you should have is your NCAA fire zone America blitz, whatever it may be. And whether you're running it out of a 3-4 or 4 down, I do think that's so vital and useful in today's day. Um, just because you're getting guys moving and dropping out of places and doing different things, I think that's, scheme wise, is probably, that's probably our first real pressure based scheme that we put in. It's a cornerstone, I think, of every pressure, or every defense. Personally, I think it should be a cornerstone. You should have that pressure package in there. Um,
Yeah.
from that perspective. Outside of that, I mean, if you really want to get exotic with some stuff, I think the one thing that, you should have in your system is a, double A gap bug stuff, that really messes with protections. Whether you're bringing them or not bringing them,
Yeah.
I think that's important. You got to have some ability to show some double A gap mug stuff where all of a sudden it really, messes with the protection scheme and how they're going to block it. Even in the run game, it's a pain in the rear. So
Yeah.
I think that's important. I think that's one of those things that should be in a defense. I would say the American Blitz, NCAA fire zone stuff, and then some double A gap mug stuff. I think that is important. To have that in your package, because it creates multiple layers. You're presenting multiple different pressures out of that. You can do a bunch of different things. You can bring them. You can drop them. You can rush one, drop the other one, and then bring a guy from the other side, those type of things. So I think those are probably kind of the two big things that I would say every defense probably should have in their scheme. Now, hey, there might be some crush front guys out here that think I'm crazy. That's fine. I think, crush front is a bear to deal with, from that standpoint. It's a good defensive scheme. And
It's a
maybe
bitch when you got the dudes for
yeah,
sure. It
100%.
is.
And they might think they don't need that stuff. But, there are times when you're going to need some of those things and be multiple. And I think you can get into it, whether you're 3 down or 4 down, and get into both of those things.
Yeah. Switching gears, last kind of question before we get into a segment here. I grew up, or I guess I shouldn't say I grew up, but I got recruited via text
Hmm.
and some mail and a few emails here and there. I was just before the Twitter recruiting went crazy. Um, I just want to get your perspective on this. How have you seen recruiting really change over the years? Because now it's all on Twitter or X. It's all on that. And we do you do some email recruiting. That's primarily probably your correspondence with the head coach, at least your initial conversations. But with players, it's like, gosh, who's got the time to have all those guys in your contacts? With Twitter, it's like those guys got their huddle in there. They got, exactly who they are. It's all nice and neat there for you in huddle. Like, how have you seen it change, from the first year of recruiting to now, how it's totally different?
Oh my God. I mean, the first year of recruiting for me was back in 2005. So, I mean, we're talking in the infancy of Facebook, at that point. Like Facebook just
Right.
came out like my senior year of college. Um, so X, Twitter, what I call it Twitter. I don't call it X,
It's
it's
Twitter.
Twitter.
Throw that out. Sorry,
Yeah,
Elon.
yeah, it is what it is, man. Sorry, it's Twitter. Um, but like the evolution has been crazy. Back in 2005, you were getting your list from high school coaches. It was all email correspondence. You were calling kids, you weren't texting, you weren't allowed to text back then.
Right.
At the Division 3 level, we weren't allowed to text recruits until, I think it was 2012, maybe 2010, somewhere around there, where you could start recruiting kids via text, all that
Mhm.
stuff. It's evolved. I mean, the one thing that I appreciate the most about the recruiting aspect and the evolution of it is the availability of film, right? You're not digging through. I used to be a part of the recruiting where you had VHS tapes, DVDs. You're like, oh, I got this recruit from such and such, Minnesota, that's a really good ball player, and then you're searching through 30 DVDs that the kids sent, all these recruits sent
Mhm.
you to find that one, right? So, the availability of that piece, the evolution of that has been phenomenal. To me, Twitter, that's a tough piece because you can't really get a feel for what the kid's really saying, and it can be perceived the wrong way. I
Mhm.
still recruit, you know, I'll recruit off of Twitter. I'll recruit kids. I think it's more so for us finding those kids and getting their information, but then being able to set up and text with them and have a conversation over the phone. I think that's a lost art in this day and age,
Yeah.
you know. And it's not just the kids; it's the coaches. I mean, it's about convenience. I can DM 150 kids on Twitter and get responses back, but if I text a kid, that's a lot harder, right? Because you said it, like trying to keep all those contacts sorted out and everything in your phone. I think that's one of the things that we do a little bit differently here. We will follow kids on Twitter, we will DM them, but we also do a lot of text conversations and over the phone, calls. Right? I think that's important.
Yeah.
It's in this day and age, especially in our profession, it's really easy for some coaches to just be like, "Oh, I'm just going to DM all these kids and throw an offer out," and
Right.
I think that kind of waters down the experience. I think it waters down the relationship, is a big piece there too. So I like to have text conversations with guys. I like to jump on the phone every once in a while with them. Back in my day, that was all we did was get on the phone with coaches. So I
Yeah.
can understand as a young kid how bearing that can be at times if you got 15 different coaches calling you and trying to get on the phone with you. That's why I don't try to do it as my primary way of, recruiting guys, but I do try to do it and, create a relationship with them that they know, like, what I'm texting them is also what I'm saying to them over the phone.
Right.
And I think that's important. But yeah, the evolution has been crazy. I mean, the availability of their film has been one of the biggest things. Like when Huddle took off, that was a game changer. Because
Right.
guys can create their own highlights. They don't got to go into their coach to ask them, "Hey, coach, can you put a highlight together for me and put it on a DVD so I can send out, 150 DVDs to 150 different schools so that they can take a look at that stuff." The availability of it being online now is important. Makes our job easier of finding the right recruits that fit our program. We still got to build those relationships with them, but we also got to build those relationships with the coaches. And I think that's a
Yeah.
big piece that gets lost sometimes too. Is
For sure.
the head coach, you're recruiting a guy and you've never spoke with the head coach. Like, that's not a good recipe for success. You got to
Right.
talk with those guys about them and let them know, like, "Hey, coach, I'm talking with such and such. Is there anything I need to be aware about? Or, I just want to let you know, like, we're really interested. We're inviting them to campus so that they feel like they're a part of that." Now, some high school coaches are very involved with that aspect, and some coaches are like, "I got too much stuff to do. I gotta teach, seventh grade biology. I got all these tests to do and all this other stuff. I don't have time other than breaking down the film and coaching my guys to be involved in that process." But there are coaches out there that are still they very much want to be involved with that piece and let you know all the ins and outs. And I think that's important. I mean, you got to build those relationships not only with the players but also their coaches, because then you get that secret sauce in my mind of, like, all the information, and then if you built that relationship also with the coach, he's going back and talking with the recruit about, "This is what they told me. I think this would be a really good fit for you. I think you
Yeah.
should take that visit, or you should think about really committing there," those type of things. So yeah.
The it's crazy like how those coaches in Arizona, like not to diss on Iowa coaches at times, but man, like those Arizona coaches are so buttoned up. Like I remember going into Red Mountain High School down
Hmm.
there and this head coach, like, first of all, I was like the I was like the 30th coach to go in there that day, but regardless, had a packet, literally a packet for me, like to go through, and then like first he we sat down and chatted about his perspective on these guys. He's asking me questions like, what's it take to get into school? What are your needs like? And then he was just like, you know, he'd just be like, "Need you here now." Like, need you. He was just calling these guys up like that. And I feel like the administrations, down there at times are like, "Yeah, these kids want to play ball, and so we're going to let them out of class if we have to." And so, and a lot of those Arizona coaches aren't really, they're doing like a strength class, but probably most of those kids are football players. But it's just crazy how like you go in there and those coaches are so buttoned up. Like they have packets ready, they have all the stuff ready. Their players and like sometimes you recruit down. For me, like Southeast Iowa, you're like, oh yeah, let's see if Johnny's here today. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, well, and some of that's the population in which you're recruiting from. Like you
right,
had a tough territory in Southeast Iowa, right? There's not as many schools and the populations aren't as big, but when you go down to Arizona, it's a little bit bigger population down in,
right,
Phoenix, northern Phoenix and Flagstaff, those things. But also I think a lot of that comes back to the high school association stuff. I think Iowa's gotten a
yeah,
lot better over the years of really, really pushing through the high school association, the football association, of pushing coaches to really get that information put together ahead of time because the recruiting timeline has moved up. Whereas, I mean, down in Arizona, that is the tough part for those coaches down there. Whereas in Iowa, it's probably not as tough. It's tough for them to get their kids recruited down in Arizona because there aren't as many options, right?
yeah.
You think about it, in Arizona, in the state of Arizona, you got, Northern Arizona, Arizona State, and you got a couple JUCOs and maybe one or two NAIA schools. When you look at the state of Iowa, you got, Iowa,
All
Iowa
of it.
State, you got all of it, right? You got all these NAIAs, you have all these Division threes. So these high school coaches are getting bombarded all the time with
Right.
stuff, right? Whereas down in Arizona, they're probably not getting bombarded other than certain periods of the time. So they could be, have all that information and they're really mindful of that piece because they know that there are going to only be certain times in the year where these coaches are going to be down here. So we got to be buttoned up. Whereas in Iowa, you're going to have coaches going in and out of the doors all the time in the spring, in the fall, in the winter. Like that is a big thing. We create those relationships with them, and we're hitting them. I mean, when you were down in recruiting Southeast Iowa, you went down there in the spring, right? Then you went over in the fall when we had like, fall break. You were contacting the coaches, talking with them. As soon as we got done with the season, you were getting out to go set up, off season recruiting and go on the road in Iowa. Like they're gonna
Yep.
see you a lot more. And I think that's one of the things like down in Arizona that, they have to be on top of those packets right away because they know they only got a small time frame in which they're going to get these coaches coming
Yeah.
in, whereas they've done a better job with it with the Iowa football clinic, the high school clinic that they do. They have a whole recruiting deal where all the high school coaches, you're a member of the high school association. They upload their upcoming, seniors and juniors into that list. We get all that information. We're doing more, school visits and those type of things in the state because it's our backyard. It's easier to do that. They don't have to worry about or stress about this is the only like 2 week period in the spring that these guys are going to be here. They
Hmm.
they they can be a little bit more flexible, I think, from that standpoint. I think that's an important aspect. And like you said, sometimes too, that's the other big difference is the state requirements for high school football coaches in the state of Iowa versus Arizona is different. You got coaches down in Arizona where all they do is coach football, and they're paid X amount of dollars. They get paid really well. They don't have any teaching responsibility. Where in the state of Iowa, and 9 times out of 10, when you're
Not gonna find much.
yeah,
The many coaches that aren't.
no, yeah, a
Yeah,
lot of
for
those
sure.
guys got a lot on their plate. They're coaching football, but they're also teaching classes, or they're an athletic director, whatever it may be. They got a lot more on their plate, from that perspective. So, yeah, I definitely think there is some nuances there from that standpoint. But I do think, hey, the state of Iowa, the Iowa Football Coaches Association has done a great job of continuing to grow and get better.
Yeah,
They've done
definitely.
a lot better job of getting information out there too. That's one of the things that I think is important. There's a lot of good football players in this state that are getting the opportunity to play ball. And a lot of it's because the Iowa Football Conference, football, high school association has done a really good job of promoting the game and promoting their schools and promoting those things and getting those things out there.
Yeah. But moving on to, a segment, and this might be tough. This might be tough for you. And we can certainly do some honorable mentions,
Okay.
but we're going to do Mount Rushmore of players you've coached.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you
Wow.
got 4 spots. You can mention as many as you'd like, but we got to narrow it down
Whoa.
to 4 guys.
Four guys that have played for me, Mount Rush. Wow. Well, the first one that would come to mind was a young man. He's not so young anymore. His name's Zach Stafford. He was a nose tackle for me at Bemidji State. This kid was a phenom. 6'2" and a half, 295 pounds. He could squat a house, bench a house, hang clean a house, whatever you want to do. He did everything for you. How good of a player he was. His senior year, which would have been his 5th year, he got a stress fracture in his foot
Hmm.
in preseason camp. Missed the first 6 games of the season and was still named NSIC Defensive Player of the Year with only playing 5 games.
My goodness.
Yeah, he was a phenomenal. We called him Stu. He was awesome. Loved him. Loved playing for. Loved coaching him. I loved everything about him. Wow, this is gonna be tough. Trying to figure out this Mount Rushmore. I'll go to most recently. You know, God, man, This is gonna be tough because now I don't want to leave any of those 3 guys out from last year. I would say CJ obviously is on that Mount Rushmore. He's just such a dynamic player. There's a reason why he's been a first team all conference player the last 2 years as a sophomore and a junior, and been a second team all region player. I don't think he gets necessarily all the credit he should get. I think sometimes there's some a little bit of bias there because they think we're just blitzing him all the time, but he does a lot of things for us, not only defensively but special teams wise too, but also from our
Hmm.
cultural leadership standpoint. Um, wow, man, this is really tough for me because I don't want to leave out, May, Shaban, or Truitt. But I also don't want to leave out some guys at other spots that I've coached. Um, you know, man, that's tough. I guess the next guy for me would be a young man by the name of Hassan Thompson. Played at Grinnell College for me. He was an outside backer. He was 6'4", 260. Really physical player, really good player. Loved him. He went through. The kid had, by the time he graduated, he had 2 kids. Um, he high school sweetheart. They got married. They're still married right now. They got 3 kids. Love them to death. They did a great job. He was always passionate about trying to get better. He was a New Orleans boy, so we recruited him up to Iowa. So he would be the third guy on that list. And the fourth guy for me, it's kind of a toss up between 2 players. Um, the first one being Zach Truitt. Everything you want in a leader. Holds the people accountable, works his tail off, did everything you asked him to do. Right. The second guy would have been one of my defensive ends, Robbie Molstead, up at Bemidji State. You want to talk about a guy that could flip a switch on and off. He was one of those guys. Like he wasn't going to have the great measurables in the weight room. He, wasn't going to lift a lot of weight, but that dude could snap it on when he needed to. If I told him, hey, I got to get a sack now, yeah, I'd tell him to flip the switch and he'd go get it. Those type of things. I guess those would be. I mean, if I had to choose between the two, I'd probably go with Zach as the fourth guy on that list, just because Robbie was a little bit of a meathead and kind of some
Hmm.
problems off the field at times. But I loved him to death, and he was a great player for me. So, but if I had to choose between those two, those would be Zach would be my fourth on that Mount Rushmore for me.
Surprised Slager's not on that list.
Yeah, Slager was a great player. I loved him. To mention him, one of those guys that really, got after and did everything he could within his capabilities. Was an all-time, leading tackler at Grinnell, was an NCAA Division III all-time leading tackler. It's tough for me to leave some of these other guys off that list
For sure.
and put
No, it's
him
hard.
on there. But I love him to death too. He was see ball, go get ball type of guy. It's just that's tough, man. When you've been coaching as long as I have,
No, I know.
it's
It's
just like, dang, man, I don't.
my list is very short.
Yeah, it's hard to be like, oh, well, you think about this guy, you think about that guy, and it's just like, it's tough. But definitely, I've been very blessed to work with a lot of great young men that really took the coaching from me and got better. From that perspective, I've worked with a lot of athletes. I mean, even outside of football. I mean, being the head strength coach at Grinnell College for years, I got to work with all of our athletes. So, there are some of those athletes that I would say, if we were saying just athletes and not football players, some of these guys might not be on that list because there were some
Right.
some athletes that I worked
For
with as a
sure.
strength coach that were really good, really phenomenal.
Yeah. Last question before I get you out of here. What's your advice to, young coaches looking to make an impact, looking to get into it, and just generally, just some advice you might have?
Yeah, I guess biggest piece of advice I can give to young coaches getting into is be patient. It's I do think we live in this microwave society where we want everything instantaneously. And because it's easy doesn't mean it's necessarily good for you. I think when you think about the things that you've gained in life and the success you've had in life, a lot of struggle and work came from that or led up to that for you to get to that, right? To that point. Patience and just work, man. Like I think those are the two biggest things that a young coach can really gain value to a coaching staff and really help themselves out. I know it's difficult at times because you in your mind as a young coach, you're starting to think like, well, we should do this or we should do that, and if I was doing this or if I was calling it, I would do it this way. Those type of things. It's easy to get into that trap and
Hmm.
fall into it, and I think it's hard for us as coaches to sometimes step back and kind of see some of the reasoning and have patience with the process. You know, the success doesn't happen overnight. If it does, typically that success burns out pretty quickly. If you want to be in this profession and you want to coach for a long time, you've got to have patience and you've got to do the work because it's not just going to happen. I mean, I know guys that got into coaching and their stock rose really fast, but then they dropped really fast too.
Hmm.
And some of those guys are not in coaching anymore. They're not doing it anymore because they thought they were just gonna get a job here and then all of a sudden 3 years later be a P4 coordinator. Because that's just how it happened. That's how they thought it would happen. So, with that piece of the patience and the work is, you know, be where your feet are. You know, be excited where you're at. I know it can be difficult at times with things if they're not going your way at times, but find the joy in the little successes that you have and be patient, because at the
Hmm.
end of the day, if you do that and you work hard and you're patient at it, things will sort itself out. It'll work out for you in the long run. And this is not a sprint. We talked about it early on in the podcast. Like we're sprinting from one thing to another, but the reality is the coaching lifestyle is not a sprint. It is a
Yeah.
marathon. It's going to take time. You got to develop as a coach. You got to build relationships and those pieces. And if you want to be in this for the long haul, that's one of the things that you really got to hone into is being patient and working your tail off at everything that you do. And then find the joy in the small successes that you have.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. This has been a blast.
Yeah. Who knew this would go
Anything
2
else?
hours, man? You know?
I know,
Like
I know. I was looking up at the clock. I was like, man, we've been at it.
yeah.
But no, a lot of good talks, talking ball. Always good to talk to a friend, talk to a smart man like yourself. So
I appreciate you. Give me too much credit there. Hey, I got some degrees, but I'm not the smartest man in the world. But no, I enjoyed this. This is fun. I'd love to do it
yeah,
again,
of course.
whenever. And, like I said, I mean, just reach out at any point if you need anything. And, hopefully
Absolutely.
somebody, that's watching this got something out of it. Okay.
Absolutely. That's the goal. I appreciate it, man. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Left Hash Call. We'll see you next time. Peace. Thank you for listening to the Left Hash Call. For more episodes, you can go to Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter, and even Facebook if you're into that. And I would really appreciate you subscribing, following, or just continue to listen. We'll see you next time. Peace.